Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. in this in this series, the Phelemonix Clax charter. This is the Phelemonix Clax charter v.6. This is the scientist with sort of an overview in and around a in around a specific and particular as a particular sort of some focus in and around transplant immunobiology. And so what I thought I'd do here is provide a sort of overview in and around a sort of in and around some research that I had sort of come that I had sort of identified, and I thought I'd provide an overview around this. So, solid organ transplantation and donation data registries are and have been used to record sort of the wishes of those who want to who seek to put their wishes forward in regards to solid organ transplants. In regards to solid organ transplantation, and there is in this context, this is or data a sort of solid organ transplantation and donation data registries are sort of are also sort of processes that can be that are used on behalf of those who might be are amongst the, for example, amongst the living, or those who are who have passed away, for example, or deceased, wherein the data registries in this context and in line to solid organ transplantations are checked, but are used and to record the wishes in and around transplantation. Now, donor registries that record an individual's decision to be, for example, a deceased donor, and also are also used to promote, in some contexts, promote sort of organ donor sort of awareness and evaluation. And whilst there is literature and research that focus on live and cadaveric transplantation across different aspects of research, there is I'd like to a sort of a previous audio podcast in this particular series around the sort of the prospect of implementing new estimated glomerular filtration rate equations or calculations in around and specific to renal insufficiency, for example. Generally, in context of the new eGFR equations or calculations, there is sort of little or sort of no research that sort of looks at or explores the context of these calculations aligned to recipients aligned to recipients of cadaveric aligned to recipients of cadaveric as solid organ transplants. And so this audio podcast delves into works that has been retrospectively published in around the use of solid organ transplantation and donation data, databases, and data sort of registries and sort of aligned to the basis for those for databases, and so with that, this audio podcast will sort of proceed into delving into that. I want to highlight a little bit around some works that was published a little while ago, but has a link there has a link in line with what's just what in line with the works that have been highlighted, and this is where I'm now going to highlight in context of worldwide sort of variability in deceased organ donation registries, and this was works that was published by Rosenblum in 2012. Rosenblum and team in 2012. It was published in Transplant International, and the team highlighted that the variability in deceased organ donation registries worldwide has received little attention. The team considered all operating registries where individual wishes about organ donation were recorded in a computerized database. The team included registries which recorded an individual's decisions to be a donor. For example, so donor register. Decision to be a donor, and specifically a donor registry, and registries which only recorded an individual's objection, which are referred to as non-donor registry. The team collated information on 15 characteristics, including history, design, use of a number of registrants for 27 registries. Most registries are nationally operated and government owned. Registrations in 5 nations expire and require a renewal. And some registries provide the option to make specific organ selections in the donation decision. Just over half of donor registries provide healthy binding authorization to donation. In all national donor registries, except one, at least when this works was published, the proportion of adults registered was modest, and the proportions can be the proportions in this context can be could be lower when only affirmative decisions are considered. One nation provide priority status on the transplant waiting list as an incentive to affirmative registration, while another nation makes registering a donation decision mandatory to obtain a driver's license. Registration objections in non-donor registries are rare, and the variation in organ donation organ donor registries worldwide necessitates public discourse and quality improvement initiatives to identify and support leading practices in sort of registry use. This works also highlights that 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 the that for example, there were uh, data in this works was highlighted from for example, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Iran, Israel, Kuwait, Lebanon, Malaysia, and the Netherlands. And they look and the work and the team look at various aspects of the of the organ transplant sort of waiting list, and the sort of registry aspects that relate to this as well. And in line with this, also, the team the team highlight, to their knowledge, at least at the time that the works was published, this was perhaps one of the most comprehensive and current and global reviews of active donor and non-donor registries worldwide, and they examined multiple characteristics covering the history, the design, and the use of the registries, as well as the number of registrants. The results highlight the considerable variability in deceased donor registries worldwide. Most, but not all, registries are nationally operated and where they say in the abstract that they are government owned. There is usually a specific minimum age requirement in order to register as well. Some registries provide registrants with the option to select specific organs to include and or exclude from donation decisions, and most registries are consulted by health professionals involved in organ procurement through a computer after a database after a donor referral and before discussion with the next of kin. Just over half of the donor registries are considered legally binding authorization to donation. In all national donor registries, except in New Zealand, at least at the time, the proportion of adults registered either affirmative decisions or objections was modest, and again is often even lower when only affirmative decisions are considered, and registered objections in non-donor registries are rare. The team sort of ultimately highlight that the registry data in and around solid organ transplantation, at least at the time when this works was published, are common around the world, and that they vary in the objectives, design and use. The information can be used to prompt public discourse and quality improvement initiatives amongst providers to identify and support leading practices to support leading leading practices. Now, in line with so in line with sort of overview alongside the previous sort of topic, if you like, there generally um, in line with organ transplantation, solid organ transplantation, everyone generally knows that it is a sensitive, it can be a sensitive topic, and by no means is this audio podcast in and about promoting the idea that everyone should go on to the organ transplant list. Whatever anyone does with their organs is by definition up to individuals. However, just to highlight, in context of laboratory practice, laboratory medicine or pathology, and in context as what's been highlighted in line with estimated glomerular filtration rate and the calculations, generally speaking, the focus has in literature has more often than not focused on live transplant, live donors and live transplant or live donors and live transplantation and aspects of live transplantation. Now, in the works in the literature, whilst there's sort of case reviews and there's works that have been published that look at sort of transplantation in context of cadaveric from cadaveric aspects of transplantation. Academics and researchers have not really delved into investigating and looking into eGFR and new calculations versus older calculations and equations in amongst cadaveric donors in amongst the cadaveric transplant population, and so therefore, whilst from a somewhat preemptive sort of preemptive or a somewhat default predisposition, the article and the works that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, highlight again or sort of substantiate that whilst whilst there may be there could be a systematic overestimation amongst the general population in according to identifying or determining renal function. Now, in that context, as well, whilst there can be a sort of overestimation in determining renal function in the general population, owing to, for example, particular therapeutics or pharmacotherapy and particular drugs, etc., that can be used on a day-to-day use that people in the general population would use, for example. At the same time, with these new calculations, and in context of laboratory or pathology, generally speaking, what's not known and what needs to be done is to understand or determine how the calculations, the new calculations and equations to determine renal functions, whether they have an effect or they have an impact or even a burden in and around those who could be, for example, suspect or high risk for renal insufficiency in the general population, and also wherein, for example, would they be more disadvantaged, for example, in and around on the waiting list for a solid organ transplant if for example there is no live donor that comes forward, and if more people are being more people in the general population are suspect or high risk for chronic kidney disease or CKD, then for example investigations or more studies, more investigation, more research needs to be needs to actually focus into or look into the cadaveric aspects versus the live donor aspects, because generally speaking, live donation has always been given a sort of a premise and a basis, when cadaveric side of organ transplantation isn't really or has not been looked into or explored, and so in line with this, and these and sort of and of course sort of eliminating race-based calculations and equations to determine sort of aspects of care or aspects of laboratory practice, or how laboratory practices are used to determine kidney and renal function, etc. Then generally speaking, it is important that with sort of the sort of overviews that have been highlighted in between these two different sort of topics in this particular audio podcast, that the general population become more sort of aware around sort of the aspects that pertain to general medicine, if you like, but also asking sort of those important questions in around sort of in and around calculations or equations that are used, because apart from laboratory medicine and pathology being quite areas of healthcare that are not really always viewed in, for example, in the media, or understood even by the media, etc., then it's important that frontline health professionals, for example, along with patients and carers, etc., are having when looking at sort of a renal function, for example, or determining renal function, that having an understanding of how the investigations, or how the investigations, how the analyses are in around sort of physiological physiological or pathophysiological processes are determined in context of sort of healthcare more generally. And it's important that those in the general population sort of have that sort of understanding, to have have and be part of sort of excellence in practice, in context of in context of in context and in line with sort of treatment that patients should have and would be eligible to have, and so therefore these works are available online, and I will I will put the sort of references or the citations in the descriptions in and around this sort of social media aligned to this particular audio podcast. So listeners and viewers are more than welcome to check out the information. As a side note, the American Society of Nephrology and the American Society of Nephrology 2022, the article that I've sort of annotated from or highlighted is a general is also a discussion of generality as well in aspects of healthcare since there's been lots of things in and around in and around race in and around in and around sort of tackling and challenging health inequalities and racial disparities in sort of general aspects of healthcare, but also in line with a sort of public in line with public health as well. And so again, to highlight, there are sort of audios and podcasts under sort of Storm Lobostics production, and